Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. Joining me today is Patricia Blake, CEO at the Heart Rhythm Society. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about where you are currently and maybe why associations in this crazy industry?
It is a crazy industry. We love it so much. But so yes, I am actually in Washington, D.C., although I also have a residence in South Carolina. So I'm back and forth like many of us these days.
Yes.
But my office was in Washington, D.C. We now, as of April 1st, are completely remote, so I could be anywhere, as my staff is anywhere.
All over the map.
All over the map, but certainly all over the country. Thus far, we haven't gone beyond our borders, but I would not be surprised if that happens, actually.
Yes.
So that's some of the new freedom that we have. But I've been in this business for a very long time. This is my third CEO gig. I started at the Society for Manufacturing Engineers in Dearborn, Michigan. Yep. Landed there and fell in love almost immediately with associations. So why associations? Well, I found out that I really enjoyed working with volunteers. It is, as we all know in this business, it is a science and an art and all of those things. But I loved the passion that the volunteers brought. And I was a meeting planner to start with. And I was there for 6 years. And then there was a large company I was near Ann Arbor, Michigan. That was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I decided that there was a job opportunity there. And I thought, for profit, I'm going for it. Paid more, lots of travel, all kinds of exciting things. So I did that. In about the first 3 months, I realized that this was not a good idea. And I was there a year because at that time we made sure that we had at least a year on our resumes. So I stayed there for a year, but I went back, and fortunately I was hired back in the association I had left. But what I realized, and this is really what cemented me to the world of associations, I didn't like the political stance of the owner of the company. It was a very large company, and he donated lots and lots of money to causes I totally disagreed with. Yeah. And I realized that I wasn't very comfortable spending my time and my energy to help him further causes I didn't believe in.
You do get to take this position of being sort of the tip of the spear for an industry or a cause and it is an industry that's driven by passion, volunteers, but all the way through. Every kind of role within that gets behind it. So, but you influence the for-profit industry, right?
Well, we do, and what's important to me, I think, is in my shift, because I shifted to the medical side. After I'd been for 9 years with manufacturing engineers, really enjoyed it. And as I said, I was a meeting planner, but realized that I wasn't particularly good at meeting planning. I didn't remember all the things that I was organized. That was good. And we worked with.
You have to be organized to be a meeting planner.
Organized, right. But, I have to be organized as a CEO too. So that
true.
But what I don't have to do as a CEO is remember where every elevator is and every bathroom is and every convention center. I hardly remember if I've been to a city, let alone what the configuration looks like. And all the good meeting planners will tell you that they remember all of those things. But what I realized is that I loved the committee work. I absolutely adored working with committees, and that's who actually planned the conferences. So that was lots of fun. And then I decided to shift. My husband and I moved to Minneapolis, and I worked for the Academy of Neurology as a director there. I was there for 6 years, and in that period of time, my CEO put me in charge of at one point or another, nearly every department in the organization.
That's a great experience.
It was such. I always say that it's his fault or his benefit that I became a CEO, because I had such broad experience, which is another thing that I think is really important, Lucas. When you think about what is attractive to many of us about associations, it's the breadth of what we do. Yeah. You can come up in an association and be a publisher or a membership expert or accountant or, a myriad of things, and all still be contributing to that organization and to the mission of the organization.
Yeah, it's not too unlike my own story in the sense that except I'm in the for-profit side. We have for-profit consulting companies that work for associations. Yes. But the sense of I started an organization where I sort of bounced around, and I got a sense of business development and marketing and analytics and operations and finance, and I got to touch it all. And what I found was what I really liked was how all the pieces fit together to accomplish the mission, right? I liked sort of the architectural sense of, well, how can we connect all these dots so that everybody understands and everybody's moving in the same direction, and we create this broad focus to strategically plan for longer terms. I mean, that was exciting to me.
Well, and and the fun part building on that is that the people that are attracted to the different aspects of an organization are very different. I mean, just like the people that are attracted from a volunteer perspective. And now, I work at the Heart Rhythm Society, and so I work with electrophysiologists, which is a subspecialty of cardiology. Highly trained. It takes 12 years to get through medical school up until, becoming an electrophysiologist. So smartest people in the world. And you can, there's a personality trait that goes often with, even within specialties. I've worked with emergency nurses, with GI docs, and now with electrophysiologists, and their personalities are different. Just like staff, because your publication staff are not the same kind of people as your membership people, and your membership people are not the same as your corporate development folks. And so it's fascinating because you have not only different disciplines, but you have different people. Now that's a challenge sometimes, right? Because we don't all view things the same way, which is important. We shouldn't view things the same way, but there are days when it's like, man, I wish we all had, X viewpoint. That would be easier. Not good, but easier.
No, that's sort of the next level, right? When I talked about the big focus pyramid, if you will, below that in each individual role, there's an aspect, as you said, of finding the right person in that seat, which really becomes the accelerator for everything, right? So when you have somebody in a seat that they're just not best suited for, it's not where their gifts lie. It's obvious, right? After a while, you can start to sense these things, and the power that can lead to if you can get that right. And now, as we talked about earlier before the show, which was now we have to manage that organizational culture remotely. So you're, have Washington, South Carolina, Michigan, California, wherever you are, you have the joy of figuring out how does this distributed workforce retain culture, stay on mission, and stay connected personally and professionally, right? I mean, you a good part of our careers, you get to know these folks and you do some life with them. You do a lot of business together, but you do some life with them, and it's a natural aspect of that. So you all just went fully remote this year, and can you tell us what are some of the things you've already observed?
Well, a couple things. We've been remote basically for 3 years. I mean, so yes, we had an office space in DC, and yes, it was open. But we only had a few people that would ever go into the office. I was one of them. When I was in town, I'd go in, a few days a week, just for a different viewpoint, I guess. So it is more of a psychological shift to know that we actually don't have any physical space at all, because in effect, we've been remote for quite some time. Right. And, and I think as we were talking a little bit earlier, it's what I am discovering or realizing, and I guess I knew this in some capacity for years, is that we have to learn to manage differently. We cannot expect to manage the same way we have, in my case, for decades. We have to look at this new environment and say, what do we need to do differently? How are we trying? We all know that human connection is really important. So if we're not physically together all the time, how do we try to do that? How do we try to strengthen those bonds and make them even stronger in some cases? I know a lot more about my folks' background than I ever did before. I know 2 or 3 people's background. Now I know what living rooms look like. I know a lot of times the animals they have, the children. I mean, it's so there's the positive sides, as well as the challenging sides. But we have to be different. We have to think differently. And what is also important, and this is just such an interesting topic to me. My background is organizational communication. And so this is like a playground in some ways, trying to look at this and figure it out. But what I do think is critical is that we need to understand that your solution isn't my solution, and my solution isn't your solution. I think it's really important that we look at our own organizations and our members and our tasks, and we match what we're trying to do to that, not to what other people might think or say. It's an experiment. Yeah. It's a total experiment, in my opinion.
I agree. I mean, it reminds me now that you say that of, you remember it wasn't too long ago where all of the corporate entities, the big Fortune 500s were going to these open workspaces, right? We're ripping down all the walls and everybody's going to sort of be in the bullpen together at all levels. And that's going to be the most collaborative. And then a couple of years went by and then a few of them said, this doesn't work for me. I'm putting my walls back up. There are instances where I need to get work done, or roles, right? As we talked about, it's not a one size fits all, not for an organization, not for an individual, and not for a role. I have people who during the interview process will say, what I really like, what I really need to be successful in this role is I need time, space, and focus, and I can do the same thing over and over again. Very good. And that's great transparency. Yeah. So you're not our trade show person, I understand, but if you are our data person and you need to manage reports and do all that, you might be our person.
Well, and I built a training center, a building for my last organization for the GI docs near Chicago, and when we were building it, the architect and I had really almost a knockdown drag out about office spaces, because I said staff hate having no walls at all. And so we had cubes, but we had the higher cubes, and I finally looked at him at one point and said, "Who's paying for this, you or me?" And of course the answer was obvious. And I said, you can do what I want. But part of the reason I say that is, and this may be a sort of a lesson here too, is that was an architect who wanted it to look good. And there's no question it looked better to have the lower cubes, without question. But it didn't serve a purpose, or it didn't serve the right purpose, not for my group. Again, there are groups that would work perfectly. We had lots of collaboration space, but people needed their own space. They needed to feel they have their own space. And so you think about that and you translate that into what's going on now, and there's lots of literature or lots of information out there. Nobody really knows. There's a whole bunch of people saying, well, this is, if we don't do this and we do this, it's, frankly, it's just like the architects, they knew it looked good, but that didn't mean it worked well. And I think we're in that same kind of space. I agree with you. It's a fascinating environment to be in if we allow ourselves to step back and not get too crazy about thinking that we have to know the answer. I've said to my board all along, and they've been totally supportive of all of this, but I've said, this is an experiment. We'll do this now. And if it doesn't work, trust me, I can find a lot of office space way cheaper than what I was paying before. So I have no issue that if we need to return to having physical space, we can do that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it is function over fashion in some sense. You have to be able to, but again, very individualized still. We have also, you had mentioned you have sort of a camera on culture. We have the same. There have to be, I have to be flexible enough, I feel like, where there are instances where folks can't be on camera. And some people want to show their office and whatever's in their office. And some people would rather have the corporate background. And when you open up the camera, as you said, I like it that you mentioned you learn some things, right? Oh, okay. Looks like somebody's coming down the stairs behind you, like somebody else is home with you. Who is that? Oh, you learn a lot, but it's a flexibility we've not had to deal with before. And so as a mindset of a leader, I'm having to figure out, as you are, I assume, like what's acceptable, what works well, and constantly just sort of taking notes. I like this experiment mantra, that it is a little bit like that.
It is very interesting. And, as I say, as soon as productivity starts lagging or people start getting negative around each other, the culture starts shifting, then we'll need to do course corrections without a doubt. But at this point, it's been working for us. It's still working for us, and we'll see. I do have to say that most of the staff really, really value the ability to work remote. Not all. As we've said, this, we're never going to create an environment that everyone is 100% happy. But most of the staff really do enjoy, especially the ones literally that live around the DC area, because they're really glad they're not doing this commute. There's no question about that. So
absolutely.
Anyway. We'll see. Time will tell. And if I were, only other job I maybe would love right now would be a sociologist, because the whole pandemic and all the things that are happening in the world are going to be fascinating for, again, when you step back and forget sort of the misery and a lot of the uncomfortable issues that we're dealing with and destructive issues that we're dealing with, if you sort of could step away from that for a minute and just think about what an interesting period in human history this is. and what that's going to look like
Absolutely.
in a sociological sense, I think will be fascinating.
Great point. I mean, I think about that too, the hindsight of looking back at a period of, the Great Depression, for example, right? There's a whole generation that came out of that, and we sort of broad stroke sort of paint, and generally it's there, right? You can see aspects and the impact in their personality. And so what will be that same impact 10, 20 years from now for at each age group, right? We talked earlier that, it may be a greater impact for those younger children who are in school and doing remote and missing some of the interpersonal. But at each stage of life, each generation will have its own changes, its own impact. That will be pretty fascinating. I'm not a sociologist, but it would be a fun time to be one.
I know. I think so too.
So switching gears back to, sort of your current role and where you are now, I'm curious, what have you found challenging about being in associations? What has been, you look back and some challenging times, let's say outside of COVID, just maybe more general. COVID was its own challenge, but outside of that, what do you find to be the most challenging?
Well, I think the most challenging is that we are not for profit, and that means that our decision-making process is very convoluted. There are many, many, many times that I've said, and this may not even be accurate, right? That I've said, boy, if the only criteria were, is this going to make money or not, I would be in heaven. But almost every decision that we make has, well, is this a member value? Does it have, can we do this to support this? And so there's a lot of that kind of, following the mission. I mean, our vision is to end death and suffering due to heart rhythm disorders. There's a lot of stuff that fits under that. So I don't struggle to not hit the vision. I mean, I think that's, there's so many ways that we can try to contribute to that. I do struggle with the whole concept of, of how you drive revenue and margin. Actually, I don't care much about revenue. I care a lot about margin. And so how do you drive margin when you have so much of your organization that really is never been designed to make money or drive revenue or bring any, it's just a support service or a member value. So that's always been challenging for me. And again, it's just part of the job, frankly. I mean, it's just part of what we do. And as CEOs, of nonprofits, that's what we learn. We're trying to make money, but you have all these other factors. So that's an ongoing challenge. Frankly, that hasn't changed. Always there.
The money piece is pretty cut and dry, right? Revenue, margins, it's math. How do you measure sort of the social or the member value piece, or and maybe in other roles? And how have you found ways to say, hey, we're really being successful in driving what we're doing from a mission perspective? Well,
it depends on the organization, of course. And sure. So, with us, I mean, there's always the health policy, so whatever's on the hill, that's going to impact you. And that never is a revenue driver. In the medical world, we have so many restrictions with how industry can support us. There are firewalls everywhere. And so, one of the things that it wasn't always true, but thanks to Senator Grassley and a few others, the Sunshine Act, we have a lot of restrictions in this country. And one of the struggles that we actually have is that there aren't those restrictions in other countries. And so competitively, there is a competitive advantage in being European, Chinese, Japanese at this point, because they don't have those restrictions. And they struggle sometimes to understand that we do. And it's even the things as simple as, industry can't pay for people to come to our conference. They're not U.S. people. Right. And yet they can bring, folks in from Asia. And so our U.S. folks are like, well, gosh, they get to come free, basically. That's, and we can't, so our hands are tied in a lot of ways with our corporate support. Yet, especially in our business, in the electrophysiology, our corporate partners are critical because they develop technologies together. And so there's a absolute marriage there, and yet there's this huge firewall. So we in fact, we just started a new conference where the firewall's not there because we're not giving medical education credits for it. And the only way to avoid some of those restrictions is to not provide credits, which doesn't matter anymore, frankly, much, because we all have online platforms, which people can get as much continuing education credit as they need, and then some, without having to go anywhere outside of their home.
That's become a little bit of a silver lining. Would you say that some of that has really accelerated the ability to consume that type of certificates, certifications,
100%.
credits.
I think what it's going to do too, Lucas, it's going to free us up. Now, as I say, we have a new event, but it's even going to free us up, I think, at our big annual meeting, which is, for most associations, certainly in the medical world, these annual meetings are still a big deal and are coming back, which is great. We just came off ours a couple weeks ago, which is why it's top of mind. But I do think because of our online presence, because there's so many ways now to get CME, or ACE, it's now called. I do believe that it will allow us to be more flexible at our big annual meeting. I think we're going to start exploring ways, parts of our program that don't have credit, which means we can do different things with it. So I'm looking forward to that. Again, I think it's a bit of a revolution, and we have to be looking at our big meetings and what can we do to change them. And so I think there's some promise there.
I agree. It's a hot topic, but it also is a fortunate part moving forward that we have this opportunity where there's maybe more opportunity to either create more events that are shorter or refocus sort of the energy and purpose around the annual. So have you all been throwing around, if we take out these sort of continuing education credit portions of the event, what else could
we're
be in its
starting
place?
to do that. But to be honest with you, because we've introduced our new event, and it's called HRX, and it's a digital health event. So, it's actually our innovation event. But right now, digital health in our field is where the innovation is. None of that has credits. And what that means is that industry is developing the program with us, and they're on the stage with us. So a very different kind of concept. So some of that, I think we'll look at taking to our annual meeting as well, where there'll be sessions that are industry sponsored and industry is actually in them. So we can actually have a good dialogue, because again, in our field, industry is really critical, and they're in the labs a lot, and they really understand medicine. This aspect of medicine. So the partnership is critical. And so I do think, how we look at the exhibit hall may well be different, because now we have to have firewalls. We can't have any education around the exhibit hall. If we loosen this up, we're able to loosen up pieces of it. I think we can change that dynamic. So we'll see. We'll see. We're experimenting certainly with our new event. That whole thing is an experiment. But I think we're taking some of those lessons back to our traditional annual meeting as well.
I think it's a fun opportunity to sort of backfill that space with newer content, really take in, is it business training? Is it, is it technology training, right? That whole world is changing so quickly. And is it education around distributed workforce within the industry? What could be done and what could be the potential, and managing people could be its own session.
Right. Well, and of course, with medicine, that's one of the things they don't learn, right? They don't learn anything. In fact, most physicians and allied professionals don't really know their worth, quote unquote, in terms of dollars and cents, because they've never been taught that. And certainly if you're employed by a hospital's not going to tell you that, not unless you ask for it. I mean, so part of this ongoing education is realizing that there's education beyond just medicine, which is critical because technology is moving quickly, so we need to keep up with it. But there's a lot of human growth that we can also participate in, leadership programs and things like that. So that's fun and that's exciting, because that hasn't always been true. In the last decade or so, that's been evolving for sure. This gives us more opportunities to do that.
I went to a conference years ago and I was surprised. In retrospect, I really shouldn't have been surprised, but it was a dental industry conference, and there was a lot of emphasis on how to run the practice. And probably much to what you were just saying is they are very good dentists. They understand every bit of the medicine, probably the best tools and for the practice and all that. But running the business of being a dentist was a big area of emphasis.
Yes, I can imagine that. Especially a lot of dental offices are run by the dentist. I mean, so that's a huge area of focus for them. I agree. And, and even in our field, we're looking more at hospitals, I shouldn't say just hospitals, but at creating ambulatory surgery centers, which many other specialties have done. Our specialty is dealing with the heart and dealing with the rhythm of the heart. So, you have to be very careful with how these procedures are done. But technology and, and improvements all over the place in terms of the ecosystem, are having us look at site of service, where can these be done in different places than hospitals? And so then you get back into the business of electrophysiology, or the business of medicine, is how do you set up an ambulatory surgery center? How do you run it? How do you fund it? How do you ensure safety protocols? Just lots and lots of things which physicians and allied professionals are not trained to do. So is that a role for associations? Yes, I think so. I think that's where we move in, and we've always done the medical part. This is a new, well, it's not, again, it's been coming for a decade. I mean, I think we started understanding a decade ago that medical professionals need more skills than just medicine.
I think that kind of a common worked and met with a lot of associations, and many of the trade associations, let's say specifically, it's a tough balance, right? Between catering to the larger members who are the majority of the revenue and the dues, and finding a balance of attracting the small businesses. But those are 100% the tools that they need. It's small business training, right? You're going to bring the industry knowledge by your certifications, by giving them access to the network. But what else can you do? And exactly that, layering in the small business training, because I'll just say from experience, it's not easy, and there's a lot to it. And you just stated 4 or 5 aspects of it, and there's a dozen more, right?
At least a dozen more. Well, and it's interesting you bring up the sort of the different needs of members, and you ask about what are challenges in associations, and that's one of them. Now, I'm in a professional organization, but we're international. We're the only heart rhythm society in the world that doesn't have a regional designation to it. But most of our revenue and most of our core members are U.S. physicians. We have a lot of allied professionals, and we have members all over the world. So again, how do you, and the people that need special training in many ways are not the core of your members, to your point. So it's always this delicate balance between making sure your core members are satisfied and yet providing, often with their funding, frankly. I mean, if you think about, how they fund most of the organization, with their funding, that you're reaching out to other groups. So that's always been an interesting challenge. And, and it isn't just about numbers, right? You can grow membership numbers in a category that maybe costs you money almost, certainly doesn't add to your margin per se. Right. And yet, is that good for the organization? So balancing, those kinds of things all the time. And I'm sure in the for-profit world, there's similar kinds of things where you have to balance what is good for one group. Is it good for the whole group? It's part of the dance of associations.
Absolutely. A little bit of the bigger members are supporting the emerging markets, and what's in it for them, a lot. It's just about finding that value proposition, because the larger members know they're supporting not only the industry, but all of the initiatives, which is partly why they want to be on the board and make sure that we're being financially responsible, fiscally responsible with all of the funds of the organization and all of that. That's certainly one of those hats.
One of those hats. That's right.
Pat, what is, going into each year, I like to ask this question, what is that one thing that you look forward to in your current role at Heart Rhythm Society?
It's something I've looked forward to nearly all of my CEO career, and that's getting a new president. I've had, in all the years, I've always had one-term presidents, which is fabulous. And many, many, many years ago, when I was starting out as a CEO, I had another CEO from a nursing organization, actually, who said to me, he said, when 2 years, if you have a great president, 2 years is great. If you don't have a great president, 2 years is a lifetime. And it's interesting because a lot of times the presidents will lament that they only have a year, but it is my very favorite thing. And I have a contract, of course, and I report to a board of 19 people, so it's a big board. But I really report to the president. I mean, that's actually that's the conduit really for most of the other communication and certainly reviews, et cetera, et cetera. And it is truly my joy and my challenge every year to try to figure out how to adapt my style to help that president have the very best year they could ever possibly have. And it's fascinating. I mean, it's absolutely a fascinating process. And I like people. I get along pretty well with people, and so that helps me. But that's truly my favorite thing. It's that transition. And tomorrow I'll have my second weekly call with my new president. And of course they come up there, they're in the system for a while, so I get to know them before they become president. Although everyone changes when they're president, frankly. They all change a little bit during that period of time. But I love it. That's my favorite part.
Do you typically look in that process for somebody that's sort of the yin to your yang, or are you looking for somebody? What is the criteria that you hope you find in that role?
and of course, I don't decide that, right? I mean, we have a nominating committee in this whole process. What I look for, it's really not a personality thing much at all for me. I've had tremendously varying personalities in the role of president, and frankly, all of them, knock on wood, right? I have enjoyed working with every single president that I've had, and I think I'm on my she may be my 27th president. So I've had a bunch of them. And some are easier than others. Almost all of them by the end of their term, it's time for them to move on and time for someone new to come in. And partly that's because they work so hard, frankly. It's like a second job. But what we look for is a leader. And leaders can come in a lot of different ways, shapes, and forms. And, in our environment, sometimes it's a leader because they're the world's expert in this particular really important, for an ablation or, whatever it might be in your specialty. Sometimes it's people who just have big visions, and so their vision of the organization and where it can go is big. Sometimes they're mentors. And so it's really important to them. So it depends, but I want someone who has a vision of some kind and that then I can work with. And also it does the other piece that's really important is they respect staff. That they respect the ability of staff, that they respect that staff know things they don't know. And if everyone understands that, it works. It really does work. So there's a magic to it somehow. I can't even explain it, but it feels like that to me. It's a magic. Sometimes it works. Well, sometimes for me, it's always worked. Sometimes it's just a lot easier than others. Sometimes it's really not very easy, but it still works. It still works. If they're passionate, and I think, Lucas, this goes way back to the beginning of our organization. Why are we doing this? Well, because of the mission, I don't even like medicine. And yet I am happy that I'm able to make a little bit of a difference in the life of someone who loves medicine and is helping patients every single day. Well, if you share that kind of mission, then there's all kinds of things you can get over, right? You can work through, you can deal with because you're really on the same page.
Absolutely.
And I think that's maybe what the magic is, frankly. There is an alignment.
I would give you a lot of credit here too. The recognition of what type of president is this, right? So if we can check the box that they have a vision, we can check the box that they have a passion. It's really understanding from there, what is this particular president's gifts, right? Is it that they're an industry expert? Okay, let's lean on that. Is it that they're a mentor? Let's lean into that. And is it that they're a personality, maybe, right? Let's lean into that, right? Whatever it may be, but sort of pressing in and highlighting their gifts. What I heard is that's what is part of it. And, that's your role, right? I would say that's you've become better at time at recognizing what is it that we can really sort of highlight and elevate from this particular role
for sure. And again, it's really fun for me to do that and to see, can I help them? It's really about helping them have a fabulous year because if they have a fabulous year, the organization will have a fabulous year. It really does work like that. I mean, and sometimes because of major challenges that happen. I mean, it's so fascinating to watch people lean into or grow into their leadership. And you see that over and over and over again. Yeah. And it's a really lovely thing to watch, frankly.
Absolutely. It takes a little self-recognition on their part, but then for the group also to understand that. So if you can share that with everybody, hey, this is their gifts and this is what we're going to do really well. I've seen some fantastic leaders who have done incredible things that would never step up to a microphone, for example. Yeah. That's not their gift. And I've seen others who, couldn't add the budget, but they could do other things, right? Yeah. So you have to sort of surround yourselves with the people that complement you well and have enough recognition that what seats to put them in and again, what not.
Right.
We've almost come full circle.
And for those of us who have the gift of staff, that's also where there are some years that this whole department is really, on alert because that's the area that this president's going to think about or this department or whatever. And so, not everyone has the advantage of having enough staff to really support the president in the ways they need to be supported. But But if you do, it's again, it's a lovely thing. So that's good. And it shows. It is a blessing.
It is a
for
blessing.
Sure.
Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely. It's been a pleasure. At the end of these, as you know, we sort of wrap it up and ask, is there somebody else that you may know out there that our audience would benefit from hearing from? And I'll ask you, is there somebody that you would refer to 6 Degrees of Association?
Well, and I don't know if you've talked to her before, but are you familiar with Deborah Ben Abram? So, all right. Well, Deborah is the CEO for the Association for the Advancement of Blood and Biotherapies. So AABB is how they refer to their name. And as a colleague of mine, we served together on the ASAE board. When I was chair of the board, she was on the board. So I've gotten to know her fairly well over the years. She is a creative, energetic leader. I mean, just someone that people want to follow. And I think she would be a great person for you to talk to and for your audience to get to know a little bit.
Excellent. Full of passion. Passion, as we've said, can be infectious and can make a leader. I'm sure I'd love to hear about the other qualities that sort of make her and her story too. And appreciate you, Pat, for making that referral.
It's great. It's nice to talk with you, Lucas.
Likewise. And when you're in the DC area, let's get together. Coming up from South Carolina, do you make it up often?
Yeah, every couple of months, or for a while it was every other month, and now for the summer we'll be down in South Carolina a little bit more. So
it's a good place to be.
It's a good place to be.
Enjoy again. Thank you, Pat, for lending us some of your precious time and joining us on the show.
Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you much. Take care.